The sky burned red. The world didn't end quietly. It screamed. It screamed with the sound of breaking glass, fire in the sky, and the cries of people who didn't know if they would survive the next second. At exactly 3:42 p.m. GMT, a red beam shot from the clouds above Tokyo. Buildings turned to ash, and the sky turned red. People looked up, not knowing whether it was lightning, a solar flare, or something worse. But it wasn't natural. It was war. Dr. Alara Hayes stood on the rooftop of her research facility in Greenland. Staring into the northern sky, she had seen the satellite feed seconds before the beam struck. It came from space, not from Earth, she whispered to herself. They fired first. Her assistant, a young man named Kato, dropped his coffee cup as the news screamed through every channel. Tokyo was gone. Millions vanished in seconds. Alara rushed to the underground command chamber. Inside, old metal doors hissed open secrets no one had spoken of in decades came alive. Project Echo. Not many remembered it. A defense plan built during Earth's most dangerous years. When humans feared each other, not aliens, now the fear had a new face, one from the stars. General Marcus Reeve joined via hologram from Washington. His voice was steady, but his eyes were red. "We have confirmation," he said. "The energy signature is not ours. It's not Russian, not Chinese, not anyone on Earth. It's extraterrestrial." Everyone in the room froze. Not from shock came earlier. Now it was something else. Something colder, anger. On the coast of California, a young boy named Liam ran down the beach with his dog. He had just seen the news on his father's tablet. He didn't understand all of it. He only knew one thing. His cousin in Tokyo wasn't answering her phone anymore. He drew a circle in the sand and filled it with fire-like lines. The same symbol burned into the sky when the beam hit. The same shape now seen on screens all over. Earth in space. Satellites spun out of orbit, fried by a second wave of electromagnetic pulses. Earth's skies went dark, but deep under Antarctica, a signal woke up. It wasn't human, but it was part of Earth. It was older than humans. And it was angry. Alara stood before a black panel hidden behind ice. She placed her hand against it, and the ice cracked. A pulse of energy ran through her veins, and the lights around her turned blue. "Project Echo has heartbeat," she said softly. Kato looked at her with wide eyes. "I thought it was just a myth," he whispered. Alara shook her head. "No, it was hope, buried under ice, just in case the stars ever turned against us." At the United Nations, world leaders gathered like ghosts. Some shouted for revenge, some cried for peace, and some stared blankly at the screens. The burning red footage of Tokyo played on loop. People demanded answers. People demanded action. The president of Kenya stood and said, "This is not about power. Not anymore. This is about survival. If they fired first, they will fire again." In orbit, a debris field floated where a space station used to be. The Zoltec Empire watched from the dark edges of the galaxy. Their ships hovered in silence. One of their commanders turned to his second in command and said, "Earth should break now. They are not like us." But in the distance, Earth shimmered like a quiet storm. Not broken, not begging, waiting on the streets of New York. A mother held her daughter tight as sirens wailed in the background. The sky wasn't blue anymore. It was bruised with smoke and cloud. But above it all, something moved, not an enemy ship, something else, a ripple in the clouds, like the Earth. Itself was breathing differently. Back in Greenland, Alara stood before a circle of strange machines that were not fully human-made. She took a breath and looked into the camera broadcasting to all surviving command posts. To those listening, she said. "They fired first." She paused. "But they will regret it." Echoes of vengeance. The world didn't sleep after the attack, not because of fear, but because something had changed, something deep inside humans. They weren't mourning anymore. They were preparing. In a quiet village in Nigeria, a girl named Amina sat by a dying lantern, sketching a shape she'd seen in a dream. It looked like an eye made of fire. She didn't know that same shape was now etched into secret terminals across military bunkers, all connected to Project Echo thousands of miles away. In a high-security bunker beneath Washington, D.C., Dr. Elara Hayes stood with General Marcus Reeve. She stared at a glowing interface. Strange patterns danced across the screen. "These signals," she whispered, "they're responding to Earth's magnetic field. They're not random. They're code." The general frowned. "Elara, are you saying Earth is talking back?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned the screen and showed him the energy pattern. It matched the human brainwave frequency. In the Pacific Ocean, a Zoltec ship fell from orbit and crashed into the water, not because it was shot down, because it was hacked by something or someone. When Navy divers reached the wreck, they found the pilot frozen in terror. Its last transmission kept playing on loop. "Return the fire, return the fire, return the fire." In a hidden lab under Tokyo's ruins, a boy no older than 10 opened a locked console meant only for top-level scientists. His DNA opened it. The machines inside hummed to life. The boy's name was Cato Jr., son of the assistant who once worked beside Elara. No one told him how to use the machine. He just knew the people of Earth were not panicking anymore. They were building, not just weapons, new kinds of ships, armor, tools made from alien metal and old Earth relics. A new voice echoed from underground stations. It wasn't human, but it wasn't fully alien either. It said one word: awaken. Elara stood in a circle of young engineers, all under 25. Most had never been to war. She said, "This is not a mission. This is inheritance. They gave us war. We give them evolution." On the dark side of the moon, a strange structure began to rise, black metal, breathing softly with Earth's pulse. It wasn't built by today's humans, but by those long forgotten. A backup plan written into the bones of the planet. A memory of a war that once ended with fire and silence. And now it echoed again. A small satellite hidden inside Saturn's rings woke up and pointed toward deep space. It sent a signal, not asking for help, but declaring something far more dangerous. A challenge. The message was simple. Earth lives, Earth learns, Earth answers. On a broadcast sent across the stars, a young girl with cybernetic eyes faced the Zoltec Council. Her message played on every alien ship within range. "We didn't start this," she said with calm fire, "but we will finish it. You thought we would break, but humans don't shatter, we sharpen." In a distant part of the galaxy, a Zoltec war leader watched the message in silence. He turned to his commanders and said, "This species? They adapt too fast. They are not reacting like prey." One of his advisors added, "They are becoming what we feared, what our ancestors warned about." Back on Earth, children trained in simulation pods, learning zero-gravity combat like it was a game. Farmers turned their plows into armored vehicles. Mothers coded AI drones while their babies slept nearby. The planet had become a forge, not of peace, but of preparation. Elara stood before the first completed ship of Project Echo. It was small, but its engine pulsed like a heartbeat. It was made from Earth's core metals and alien tech. She placed her hand on its surface and whispered, "You are the answer." Ship rose into the sky without fuel, without flame, only silence and light. And from space, it sent its own message. "We heard your shot," it said. "Now hear our silence." In that silence, the galaxy waited. But Earth didn't wait. Earth remembered, and Earth was moving. The flame in our bones, the stars used to look cold, but not to the humans anymore. Now they looked like promises. Promises of revenge, of answers, of something older than fear. Because when the Zoltec fired first, they didn't just start a war. They woke up something inside humanity that had been sleeping for thousands of years. In an underground hangar in Brazil, children barely 15 were training with gravity suits. They floated, flipped, fought, learning to turn their small bodies into weapons. Their trainer, a scarred woman named Sergeant Imani, shouted over the comms, "They think we are soft. They think we cry and stop. We cry, yes, but then we burn." Above Earth, satellites captured images of a new Zaltec fleet entering the system, 10 ships, armed and shaped like giant black claws. The ships didn't attack right away. They waited, as if curious, as if doubting. Maybe they thought the first strike had done enough. They were wrong, Doctor. Elara Hayes watched from the Antarctic command base, her eyes scanning heat signatures across the globe. She saw it clearly. Something had shifted. Human brainwaves were changing. Faster reaction times, higher emotional control, stronger memory. Recall, humanity wasn't just angry. It was transforming. In a refugee camp in India, a little boy named Arav stood before a smartboard. He wasn't learning math. He was reprogramming a Zaltec drone the camp had shot down. With bare fingers and broken tools, he turned it from a hunter into a helper. The drone flew above the camp and released medicine instead of gas. The people below cheered. The Zaltec above watched and whispered in fear. They're learning too fast. On the battlefield of Mars, miners who once drilled rock now aimed magnetic railguns at the stars. They called themselves the Red Circle. No military training, no uniforms. Just fire in their lungs and dust on their boots. And yet they pushed back a Zaltec strike team, using nothing but homemade tech and stubborn courage. Their leader was a woman named Tara Iskander. She stood tall on a broken dome and said into her helmet, "They came with pride. We answer with purpose. This is our soil, even if it's red." A captured Zaltec warrior named Vrax was locked in a cell aboard a human scout ship. He had expected torture. Instead, he was handed books, human history, war tactics, and stories of sacrifice. He read about Hiroshima and the Berlin Wall, about Spartacus and Mandela. He asked the human guard, "Why show me this?" The guard replied, "Because you need to understand. We've fought ourselves for centuries. You're just the next test." Vrax began to fear, not for himself, but for his people. Back on Earth, a scientist named Dr. Monroe activated the flame. Protocol. It wasn't a weapon. It was a genetic key, a signal that unlocked dormant parts of human DNA, a part written by survival. Stress and fire, not new, just buried. The first to receive it was a blind girl named Zoe. She had been born with no sight, but when the signal touched her mind, she saw everything: heat, motion, vibration, truth. She walked into a command station and told the generals where the enemy would strike next. They didn't ask how she knew. They just listened, because Earth had changed in deep space, alone. Human ship drifted into a Zaltec territory. The aliens prepared to attack until the ship broadcast a message. A poem written by a 16-year-old boy in Alaska. The poem said, "We are the storm born from sorrow, the fire built from tears. We are not here to beg. We are here to burn away fear." The alien ships froze. Some lowered weapons, others self-destructed. Not from the poem itself, but from the fear that something worse was coming. Elara stood before the Earth's High Council and said calmly, "They studied our weapons. They should have studied our will." She looked at the stars and added, "The flame is not in our hands. It's in our bones." Broken chains of Mars. The red dust of Mars no longer moved with the wind. It moved with footsteps, heavy, determined, human footsteps, not from trained soldiers, but from workers. Engineers, refugees, and rebels. People who once came to mine the planet, now turning it into a battlefield. The Zaltec had underestimated them. They thought Mars was just a colony, a broken rock with no real strength. They didn't know Mars had teeth. The first wave of Zoltec dropships came at dawn. Their dark steel hulls pierced the Martian sky like falling blades. But as they landed, nothing greeted them. No fire, no resistance, only silence. And that was the trap. Inside the mines, deep tunnels had been turned into weapons. Old drills became railguns. Vibration sensors became motion bombs. The Martian. Miners knew every inch of the terrain, and they fought with a kind of desperation that made death look small. Among them was a boy named Ravi, only 13. He had grown up in the mines after losing his family during Earth's first bombardment. He didn't know how to fire a laser rifle, but he knew how to collapse a tunnel. He lured 3 alien soldiers inside and brought the ceiling down with a single code. He climbed out alone, covered in dust, and walked back to the camp without a word. The leader of Mars resistance was a woman known only by her call sign, the Ghost of Olympus Mons. No one knew her real name. They only knew her voice crackled across the radios before every battle. Her words were always the same. We are the dirt they step on. Let them choke on it. In orbit, Earth watched the Martian feeds in silence. The High Council expected failure, but instead they saw a miracle. People with no formal training, no high-grade weapons, holding off a professional alien invasion and winning. Dr. Elara Hayes smiled when she saw the footage. She turned to her team and said, "They didn't wait for help. They became help. Mars didn't break. It broke the silence." On a Zoltec command ship, General Vore looked at the battle reports with growing horror. Entire squads were vanishing in minutes, not from superior firepower, but from traps, tactics, and courage. "They're not fighting like a military," he growled. "They're fighting like they've got nothing to lose." In one captured base, Zoltec troops found graffiti written in red dust. It said, "We built this world. We'll bury you in it." A teenage girl named Lena hijacked an enemy drone and flew it directly into the main power core of a Zoltec hover tank. She had never held a weapon in her life, but she coded like a hurricane. She wore a bracelet made from old copper wire, her father's last gift before the mines took him. Now her hands shook with joy, not fear. The tank exploded behind her as she whispered. For Dad, the Zoltec weren't just fighting humans anymore. They were fighting grief, love, revenge, and fire all mixed into one species, and that was more dangerous than any plasma cannon. Back on Earth, media feeds finally showed the truth. Not heroes in capes, but dusty workers covered in ash and scars. Fathers carrying rifles, mothers flying drones, children running messages through underground routes. No orders, no generals, just purpose, and above them, floating in low Mars orbit, was something new: Project Ember, a stealth satellite launched by Earth's rogue engineers. It recorded every battle and sent signals to every surviving colony. A single word blinked across the screens: resist. General Reeves stood beside Elara and said quietly, "They were supposed to be weak," Elara replied. "No, they were waiting for someone to believe they were strong." In a final act of defiance, the Martian rebels lured the remaining Zoltec force into a canyon and activated a gravity trap built from scrap metal and stolen tech. The aliens floated for seconds, weightless and helpless. Then the ground roared and fire swallowed everything. When the dust settled, the Ghost of Olympus Mons stood alone on a ridge. Her radio buzzed. A voice from Earth asked, "Is Mars lost?" She answered with a grin, "No, Mars is free." And for the first time, across both planets, the words were spoken. Aloud, they fired first, but we write the story. We are the storm the galaxy no longer whispered about Earth. Now it watched in silence, not out of pity, but out of fear. The Zoltec Empire once ruled by fear. Now their own people were asking questions. Why are the humans still standing? Why do they fight like they're made of thunder? The answers didn't come from data. They came from the fire spreading across the stars. And that fire had a name: humanity. On a moon orbiting the planet Yexer, alien scientists found carvings. Deep inside black stone caves, the images were ancient, drawn long before Zaltec ships crossed stars. They showed beings with eyes like suns and hands holding storms. And beneath them, one word was scratched into the rock in hundreds of languages. Human. They didn't know how it got there, or when, but it was there. Waiting, Back on Earth project. Stormrise launched from underwater cities that had once been secret. They weren't secret anymore. The ocean split open with roaring light as silver ships burst through the waves. Silent, sharp, and deadly, they didn't carry nations. They carried Earth. Inside one of those ships, the Horizon Wraith, was a pilot named Juno Vega. She had no medals, no rank, just a scar across her cheek, and a look that said she didn't fear anything. Her ship didn't have wings. It moved with thought, powered by a new core built from human pain and alien design. The AI inside whispered, "Target acquired." Juno nodded once and said, "No survivors." The Zaltec Empire prepared a counterattack. They gathered fleets across 5 systems. One of their commanders shouted, "Crush Earth now, before they reach us." But even as the words left his mouth, the stars behind him bent, and the horizon. Wraith appeared right in the heart of their capital system. Without warning, without sound, it didn't fire missiles. It didn't speak threats. It released silence, a pressure wave that cracked hulls, shut down engines, and made hardened warriors fall to their knees. Some cried, some begged, but it was already too late. The humans didn't come to negotiate. They came to be remembered. Back on Mars, the ghost of Olympus Mons watched the broadcast. She whispered, "We are not the storm. We are what comes after, on Earth." Children painted stars on walls and called them names. Not heroes, not gods, but people, real people, their mothers, fathers, cousins, teachers, all part of the fight, all part of the flame. General Reeve walked through the hangar where Project Echo began. He saw young soldiers training beside old farmers, hackers beside musicians. He asked Ilara, "Is this how we win?" She replied, "No, this is how we change the rules." The galaxy was built on fear. The strong ruled the weak, but Earth didn't follow that rule anymore. Earth didn't kneel. It stood, and when it moved, it didn't walk. It thundered. A message was sent to every known system. From a child on Earth holding a wooden stick painted silver, he looked into the camera and said, "My name is Eli. I'm 7. I'm not afraid, because we're not small. We're the storm." The Zaltec didn't understand, not at first, but then their worlds began to fall silent. Not from weapons, from resistance, from rebellion, from humanity lighting fires in every corner of the galaxy. Not to destroy, but to awaken, and across the black sky, the storm kept moving. Ashes speak louder than fire. In the ruins of what used to be a forward Earth outpost, the wind blew through shattered metal and broken dreams. But under the wreckage, a voice still echoed. It wasn't a soldier. It wasn't a weapon. It was a child. Her voice came through a half-working recorder buried in the dust. "I don't want to die, but if I do, please tell them we never begged." Her name was Mila. Age 9. A Zaltec scout found the device while searching for survivors. He was battle-worn, armored, and trained to kill. But when he heard the recording, he froze. He listened again and again, and then, for the first time in his life, he cried, "This was not the war he was told about. This was not the species he was trained to hate. These were not monsters. These were people, and their ashes were louder than any fire the Zaltec had ever lit." On a shattered moon near the edge of the galaxy, a Zaltec research team unearthed strange symbols carved into ancient stone. The language was older than their civilization. The symbols translated to one warning: "Do not wake the humans." But the humans were already awake, Across 1,000 systems, rebellion burned, not just among humans, but among the Zoltec themselves. Soldiers began to question orders. Civilians refused to supply weapons. Priests whispered, "They bleed like us, but they do not break like us." On a rogue planet named Kellis, a Zoltec fleet commander defected. He flew his entire squadron to Earth's nearest base and knelt before a human girl holding nothing but a staff. He said, "I surrender, not out of fear, but out of respect." The girl, only 12, placed her hand on his head and said, "Ben, rise and help us finish what they started. Back in Antarctica, Doctor." Elara Hayes unlocked the final code inside Project Echo. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a machine. It was a memory, a recording made by Earth's first civilizations, forgotten by history, remembered by time. They spoke of stars that once tried to enslave humanity, and how Earth pushed back until the skies wept. Elara stood before the High Council and played the recording. Ancient voices spoke in hundreds of dialects, but the message was clear. We do not kneel, we do not forget, we do not forgive easily. Earth had never been peaceful, but it had always been patient. Now that patience was gone, on a battlefield above Jupiter, a lone human frigate exploded, taking 5 Zoltec cruisers with it. No escape pods launched. The crew chose to stay. Their captain's last words were broadcast across the fleet. "If you want our planet, you'll have to bury us first." Even the Zoltec elite began to falter. Council halls, once filled with pride, now echoed with uncertainty. Their speaker looked out the window and asked, "What have we done?" A young Zoltec student on a peaceful moon held a human book translated into their language. It was about a man who turned a broken life into a legacy. The student closed it and said, "They are not strong because of their weapons. They are strong because of their pain." On Earth, people no longer looked at the stars with fear. They looked with resolve. Ashes of their cities had fed their courage. They had lost, they had burned, but they had not stopped. And now the galaxy couldn't stop them either. General Reeve stood atop a newly built observation deck in Earth's orbit. Below him was a planet scorched and bruised, but not beaten. Around him were new ships, born from old wreckage. He turned to Elara and asked, "How many more must we lose?" She answered quietly, "Until they understand, we are not fire. We are the ashes that remember." A message was sent to the stars. From a refugee boy, holding a toy made of burned wires, he looked into the camera and said, "You fired first. But you forgot one thing. We're the species that survives everything." And with that, the fires across the galaxy kept burning. Not out of hate, but out of memory, ashes that whispered, "Never again." The day the stars went silent, no one expected it to end like this. No explosions, no smoke, no final battle, just silence. Across the galaxy, entire fleets powered down, not because they were defeated, but because they no longer dared to fight. The stars themselves seemed to freeze, as if space was holding its breath. It began with a message, not from a general, not from a president, but from a little girl, Mila, the same girl whose voice was found in the ruins weeks ago. Her face appeared on every screen in every system. Her voice was small, quiet, but it carried more weight than any superweapon ever could. She said, "You fired first, we remember. But we're not here to destroy you. We're here to make sure. No one ever forgets." And then the galaxy fell silent. Every Zoltec ship shut down mid-air. Not by force, but by choice, one by one. Commanders dropped their weapons. Soldiers dropped to their knees, not out of surrender, but out of guilt. In the Zoltec capital, the Grand Speaker stood before billions. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Forgive us." But Earth didn't answer with fire. It answered with silence. That silence was louder than any war ever fought. The Horizon Wraith returned from the heart of enemy space. Juno Vega stood on the deck, her eyes sharp but her weapons untouched. She looked down at Earth, and spoke into the void. They know now we don't scream, we don't beg, we just rise. In classrooms across alien worlds, children were taught the truth, that Earth was attacked without warning, that Earth rose not out of rage, but out of something stronger. Memory, they learned about Mars, about the miners who became warriors. They learned about Mila, who spoke louder than bombs. They learned about ashes and silence, and fire that did not destroy, but transformed. Back on Earth, the people didn't. Cheer, they rebuilt, brick by brick, story by story, heart by heart. Victory wasn't a parade. It was a child learning to smile again. It was a mother planting flowers in soil that had once seen blood. It was a father sitting in silence, knowing his son's sacrifice ended a war. Dr. Alara Hayes stood before a new monument, not of heroes, but of names, millions of names, each one carved into metal that once belonged to fallen ships, each one a reminder that peace isn't given, it's earned. She turned to the crowd and said, "They fired first, we remembered, and now they remember too." In the far reaches of space, a new treaty was signed. It was simple, only 3 words engraved in every known language. Never fire first. And above those words, in orbit around a once divided world, the stars blinked silently, not in fear, but in respect. Because Earth had spoken, not with missiles, not with fleets, but with silence that carried the weight of every soul lost, every voice heard, every child who refused to grow up in a galaxy ruled by fear. And when the silence finally broke, it broke with one voice, not angry, not loud, just calm. And it said, "This is humanity. We survived your fire. Now watch us build." And the galaxy, once full of noise and war, stayed quiet, not because it was defeated, but because it finally understood.